All right, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday talks. Bringing Reed from GearSharing here today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about growth strategy and really what is going to be the new landscape moving forward. We've talked about the technology, we've talked about the give back side, and now it's going to be, I think, a little bit more around what is going to be the personal growth side of this. What is going to be um, our own brand, what's going to be building assets that can take us through, whether this does come in waves or we don't still know exactly what the landscape's going to be for fitness gyms and yoga studios and pretty much any kind of community gatherings. But we do know things are starting to open back up. So I'm excited to share today a little bit about what we're seeing at Find My Zen. Again, I'm Michael Potter and founder of Find My Zen. And yeah, Reed, pleasure to see you, and just want to first of all check in and just see how everything's kind of coming along on your side and just see if there's any bigger trends that you're seeing, and we can go from there.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Love our little Tuesday talks. Always fun to connect for sure. Yeah, so as far as what I'm seeing, like we're obviously to a point right now where like smaller groups can start to open back up, and there is obviously that presents its own challenges because obviously there's different guidelines that gyms and studios and wellness like yoga studios are having to follow as well. As far as like really like the way that I'm seeing this like kind of like all like happen is like it's of course like one on one it's no problem. So individual like personal trainers, or if you have like a one-to-one even like yoga instructor or yoga therapy or whatever it might be, it's like that's obviously there. Now to take it a step further, I'm now in the flow of organizing groups of 10 as far as I think I've mentioned to you before, but I'm working with realtors to actually team up with them and place this in different places where they can like farm whatever neighborhood or condo building or apartment complex that they're farming. And it's just like that's just one way we can like support different brands and go ahead and like get some stuff on the books. And yeah, so I mean, I'm just having to follow everything else that like everyone else is seeing, where it's like we're just focused on groups of 10. Hopefully in June, we can get closer to June, we get to like groups of 15 and larger from there. But yeah, it's been interesting because I feel like everyone's kind of had like, okay, this is my quarantine plan. This is my post quarantine as I'm kind of starting to open up plan. And then like, how do we get shipped back to whatever it is that our new normal is? And I'm excited to kind of dive into some of those elements with you. And so, but before I touch on any of that, I'd love to hear just from your perspective, like, what have you seen this last week since we spoke? What trends are you seeing and what's kind of becoming relevant?
Yeah, I definitely concur about really examining what this is going to look like. I wouldn't even use the word post-COVID, but just during this reintegration time, just because I think that post-COVID's a whole nother conversation that we do need to keep in mind. And I think that's part of why we're going to have today's conversation is really mitigating future risk, as well as how can we really grow and connect and support during this current time. So I'm really seeing actually a number of facilitators go into a little bit more of a niche place. I think that we're realizing that the facilitators, the teachers, the practitioners really are coming up with their own content now. They're producing, they're recording, they're live streaming, they're doing it in all these different ways that they're actually really allowed to kind of speak their own voice and find what that is, because it really isn't so much, oh, that's my favorite studio that I go through and I only go through that place because it's just the easiest location. We're really going for content driven now. And so that quality and that authenticity, which I think is a key word right now, is really felt. So when I can connect to a story, when I can connect to the person, and I mean, look at how we're actually connecting right now. It's in our homes. I'm actually still at my family's home after Mother's Day yesterday. So you get to see a little bit more about what my world is. People have kids running around. People have animals. It's the classic Zoom kind of thing right now, just of what else the camera's picking up. But I think that that actually does two things. It creates a little bit more of a common bond that we are actually all going through this together. So there's a real impact, I think, on that connection with the teachers to students. And then I also think that there's another layer for people who have family, roommates, significant others that are actually getting drawn into somebody's world, whether they've known that, you know, my partner is a athlete and they're very into these things and I'm just not into it. I don't understand that world. I usually just kind of let that be. But if I'm actually seeing what they're doing and I'm like, oh, this is really meaningful to me, that can be quite good. And so I think that I'm really excited about this new connection side, but I do think that that needs to be taken into account so that teachers are actually thinking about who specifically am I trying to get, who is going to stick with me as this does ebb and flow, because we are going to lose a little bit of that connection as the in-person things do open back up.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of relay of a question to kind of piggyback onto that, it, it's so interesting because I feel like we touched on this last time. It's not so much like what do I do, but it's like who do I serve basically, and it's like it's a who, not a what. And you touched on that, and I want to dive into that for a moment because like I think everybody right now is getting just more and more clear around who their who their avatar is, who their like specific person is, and just kind of figuring out with those authentic elements or with whatever their new service offerings are, like as far as like what they're doing, like how can they serve that person even more. So I guess my question for you is like, how can, let's say somebody is either starting to figure out or just now getting into figuring out like how they specifically niche down into that who that person is. Do you have any advice for finding that person and for connecting with them on that authentic level?
I would say that um, there's two different approaches. You can approach it from reflection and actually go to 10 people that know your business, know you, know kind of the ins and outs of the space that you're in a little bit as well, so that they can give some reflection on, hey, here's where I really see you excelling. Here's what's always resonated with me. Actually find what is emoting that connection from the people that know how to also discern what that means, is very valuable, because I do think that we also still have this kind of Instagram, socially famous people, that it's just more you're connecting to the energy and the numbers and all this other stuff versus so much more the content. I do think that that's going to be a shift back. So really digging in on that side. And then I would also say journaling is another great practice. I know you and I also do that just on a daily basis to get clear, not only on our thoughts of what we need to get done, but also what is it really behind the what we need to get done that's really driving it. Because when you can find that internal place, it actually can, self regenerate. It's almost like a self sustaining energy system so that it's not so depleting. And so I feel when you really connect to those things that you're like, oh my God, internally, like, versus kind of really listening to that visceral sense, I think can be really meaningful. So doing some journaling, some prompts, you can go online and find things to get inquisitive around, um, both what it is you're truly trying to offer and what are the stories that brought you to that, because I think the story side is always such a key part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've always thought like the best way to like sell is to like understand like what your story is, but also understand like the more you can, uh, speak to something that like everybody else's story can fit into it. It's not, one thing or the other. It's like you're at that point just meeting people, networking, talking, and connecting based upon like who you are and what you're about, not like what you're trying to like push into the marketplace necessarily. So I think that just kind of comes full circle to that authenticity piece that you mentioned earlier. I'd like to kind of take a hard right and just kind of figure out like from your perspective, what is growth looking like right now? Like, and again, we don't have to use the word like post COVID or anything like that, but just in the sense of like, I think, people are becoming renewed in whatever it is that they're doing, whoever it is that they're serving, how they're doing that, how they're getting creative around that. I'd love to hear just your thoughts around that, and like really what you're saying.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think that the word growth also can be changed because I think that puts maybe an undue pressure on a system that might, we have different business models. I was on a call with ClassPass last week that they were really examining what these different businesses in New York and Miami and LA really are going through. And you have everybody from the spin cycles to the boxing to these things that you have different close barriers. You have these different factors that really drive into it. So I think
Sure.
that it's just important to really, first of all, assess what you're actually working with so that you don't start saying, oh, I need to be doing this when that actually doesn't so much apply to your model. So I think assessing that first is going to be the most important, especially with the new factors that this current scenario as like a chess player does. Figure out what pieces you have on the table and then work from there. And then I would say that um, really, to me, it's still about balance. I think that from anybody that I think is in a proactive opportunity right now, and again, that's a luxury. A lot of people are in a reactive place, and so I also support what you need to do and what has to be done. But if you are in a proactive place, I do think continuing to integrate that video component, I think that that's still really not been fully understood of what that hybrid's going to be, that people are going to want to stay in touch with those people while they are travelers. And we, again, don't know if this is going to be more staying at home. So maybe we're not just going to be as um, able to just drop into a studio. I mean, that was part of a lot of people's routine was after work, I go to the gym, I go to my studio, I go to these things, and that's part of that routine. That routine might change. So I think that really still being flexible enough to have those offerings in a way that can meet the clients where they're at is going to be probably the number one thing. So that could be growth, that could be maintenance, that
Sure.
could be um, partnerships. And I think that's the other part. Really, how could you actually start working with a nutritionist? How could these a holistic center? How could that interweaving start to happen? And that's something that Find My Zen's definitely a part of bridging that right now because it's a matter of trust of who you can even work with. And then you also need to figure out how to deploy that messaging. So yeah, just like you're working with the realtors, we're working
Sure.
with the businesses and trying to figure out where those bridges need to be right now so that it can be a yes and those barriers can be answered right away.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that you and I both in kind of unique ways serve as like a bridge, if you will, between like, whatever, that kind of fitness or wellness side is, and then whatever we're connecting them to. And in this case, like right now, it's like I'm focused on, connecting with realtors because it's like, who's been hurt over the last bit? The people that, have gyms and studios that they're still paying a lease on, and so it's just like, the realtors have been actually jumping at the opportunity at, basically what I'm pitching to them is just continuing to focus on like how do we team you up with a local fitness brand. We can provide the gear, we can obviously provide the talent. You're going to be supporting them. I talk about different ways that's going to help, and this is kind of the sales aspect. And so like, if any of you all have like a new offering that you're putting on, it's just like, I'm not speaking about how um, amazing I think gear sharing is and all of that, which I do. If you don't believe me, just ask. But no, it's like, I'm speaking to how this is going to actually help them from a visibility standpoint, do something unique while supporting a local fitness brand. Oh yeah, and here's the way that people engage with these brands on social media when there's doing these pop-up events, and here's how we can co-brand and do that so that they're seeing it as a win-win. It's a no-brainer for them, because like they're already looking for just unique ways of doing things. And so for from my perspective, it's just like, I'm already thinking about how we can create those bridges and how we can continue to do that. Um, but I want to kind of back up a minute and ask, like, there's obviously, like you're talking about with ClassPass. It's like with ClassPass, obviously their whole thing is, you can book into any gym or studio or massage or beauty or whatever it is from one app. However, uh, as COVID was happening, they were adding the online streaming component and everything. And so, they're doing that right now, and I'm sure that their numbers have continued to go up. They were I'm sure that they're continuing to do better, but obviously it's nothing like the in-person model that they've been focusing on for however many years, because it's like you can kind of shift, you can kind of figure it out. But I guess this lays into my question for you is like, how do you, with these new offerings and with these new ways of serving people, how do you then apply some level of focus to that, where you don't just get lost in the minutia, and you don't major in minor things, right? You don't major in doing all of these small things and then you drown and you're like, okay, what did I even accomplish this week? So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the bringing it back to the virtual space. It's a space that we're really focused on right now. We're doing weekly events, whether that's breath work to co-creations with sound healing and yin yoga and vinyasa flow. We've had a number of different things that we're really exploring, so that one, again, it allows people to go even more niche into their place and actually realize where that can become a more of a branded thing, that it's not just one of their offerings while they're at the studio, because you can't really teach the same thing over and over while you're at the same studio, because they need that diversification on their schedule. So the virtual place actually allows for that. And then when you can actually then through partnerships, co-creations, that's something that we're always looking to have conversation around. So if that is of interest, feel free to reach out to either of us, because I know that's something you also do. I think that then we can actually really position those unique things together, and from a kind of more third party perspective or a 5,000-foot view, actually see how that can then be even more of a well-rounded offering. But again, then that person isn't also needing to make all the coordinations and connections, figure out how we're actually going to market. Yeah, there's a lot more that goes into it that then is self-defeating, because you're really just trying to get one or two offerings, consistent things at least, that can become revenue generation for you. So I think that the co-creation is a way, even though you're niching down, then when you actually then bring that together, you can actually have more power as the package. Um, and I think that the other part that I know from just being an entrepreneur, the more you know what you're doing when you wake up, if you can have that at least down to this day's dedicated to this project, this day's dedicated to this project, or if I know you have a model more like my morning's going to be outbound, the afternoon's going to be inbound. I'd love to actually hear a little bit more about that. I think that's the other side of really niching down, is what is actually my business model going to look like, and how is the actual revenue generation going to happen? Because just saying, oh, I'm going to sell tickets, and becomes very overwhelming. So I want to hear a little bit about your approach.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And with but before I like dive directly into that, and I'd love to hear like anybody that's listening to this, kind of your perspective on this, because obviously from, let's say, a more laissez-faire, I don't know if I'm saying that correct, laissez-faire approach. It's, wake up and, like, and I'm a very big routine person. I want to focus on feeling good, but like a lot of people will say, like, just follow your impulses. All the business that you ever need will just come right to you. And for, everyone that's, like listening to this, I think there's something to be said for following and leaning into whatever it is that you're doing. But I think that there's that has to be balanced with a more structured approach for like how you do outbound as well. And so what I mean by that is, there's a really good book. It's called The 1 Minute Manager, and this is what Michael is alluding to. Basically, it's talking about be a manager, or excuse me, be a maker in the morning and be a manager in the afternoon. And so like the way that I view that is like my one thing, I mentioned, the book, The One Thing, many times with this. My one thing, such that by doing it, everything else is made easier or unnecessary, is sales. It's having conversations with people, not just counting on those things to show up and hoping that those things show up, and thinking that you talk to so many people and not ever actually measuring it, because it's so, we as people, we have these unconscious biases, and it's so easy to delude ourselves into just thinking that, okay, well, I talked to a lot of people today. Well, okay, how many is a lot? Of those people, how many appointments did you set up? Okay, fantastic. Of those appointments that you set up, how many of them showed up for the call, and how many of them purchased now, and then maybe in a waiting pattern for a little bit later, kind of thing. And how do you track that to know, like, how well your message is being received, whether you're typing it, whether you're making phone calls, whatever else. Right now I'm using a couple of automation tools that continue to help me do outbound for realtors, and for a few other different groups. And I'm focusing on, okay, if I contact this many people a day, this many people will respond to it. I'm not emotionally attached to the outcome. I know what my one thing is. My one thing is sales, because sales moves everything. And so it's just like, my one thing is sales, and I want to have this many events, many pop-up events happening every single month. How do I then reverse engineer that and go, okay, I need to do, like we were saying, like this amount of outbound, this many appointments, and then just work that down. Because again, if whatever you measure gets managed, and if it's not in your calendar, it doesn't exist. And so it's just like, that's kind of a tough yin and yang, because it's like, in the morning I'm very, very structured. In the afternoon, you're like, okay, I'm just coordinating things. I'm gonna kind of take it as it comes. I'm gonna not react to it or anything like that, but I'm going to respond knowing that that is what that time is for, and just kind of leaning into that. So that's my approach. Those are a few of my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, no, and I think we'll actually, I know we have planned as kind of more a daily habit kind of conversation, where we'll actually really go through more those structured parts. But what really resonates us from what you said is allowing those certain batches of time to be dedicated. That's really about flow state, and Deep Work is another book that I highly recommend, about really being able to get focused in those time blocks. There's the Pomodoro, process of doing work as well. 45 minutes doing, one task, and then 15 minutes of just movement and or diversifications, just so your brain can really, replenish and refocus. So that I think that we can get into that, but really, I think the part that just resonates from what you said is just at least knowing what you're sitting down to do, so that you don't get caught into the wave or the wind of, oh, well, this is, wait, bird walk, here, squirrel, squirrel, wait, here's what I was doing again. The mind can do that, especially when you are taking on different projects. So I think making sure that you can have that clarity can be really stress reducing, and actually allow for it to be more fun and not such a laborious thing.
You kind of give yourself permission too, you have permission to do these things. So that, I'm sure that everyone can relate to this. When it's like you're working on one task, you're sitting there beating yourself up in your head about why you're not doing something else, and it's like, why not just be here now, be where you're at right now. And so it kind of gives you permission to do that too.
Yeah, well, and I love this conversation with you specifically, because it is kind of the yin yang kind of theory, how to actually be really active and clear and move things forward, but also that I think allowing this to also be gentle with the process, to also enjoy the process, and and really
Of
be
course.
authentic and embodied while you go through this, instead of it just being bam, bam, bam the whole time.
Agreed. Completely agree.
Well, thank you very much for today. Always a pleasure, brother. Happy Tuesday to everybody else, and hope everybody has a great week. And we're looking forward to next week's talk. We'll announce what that's going to be. I think we actually might have somebody that's going to be coming on and joining us. We're going to confirm that here soon. And thanks, Reed.
Thanks, Michael. Always a pleasure.
All right.